Good evening. Welcome to the first meeting of the 2021 Creative Group meeting. We have had a very interesting 6 months period starting from July, and moving forward, I have also shared the calendar for the next year. As you all know, we meet regularly on the second Thursday of each month, but because January and March, the second Thursday is a public and mercantile holiday, we have decided to shift it to the third Thursday. So unfortunately, Dr. Varna from Australia, he had planned for the 14th and he's unable to join us today, so he sends his regrets. But since the calendar has been shared, everyone would be able to join on the dates that are marked in green and keep the dates free on their diaries. Most of you who are members of the creative group know what we have been doing, but for the benefit of those who have joined today and any guests or members from the PSSL who have joined who are not members of the creative group, let me just very briefly run through what we are doing. As you know, it's called the creative group because we want to do things which are going beyond the normal camera related photography only or a snapshot. We started actually working on the in-camera techniques that helped us to understand the working of the camera better. And also we had challenges running every 2 weeks, fortnightly challenges. And during that period, we actually focused on one particular aspect or a segment of the in-camera techniques. That went from the 1st of September going up to the 30th of November. Then in the month of July, we actually expanded that to bring in anything that one could do using the in-camera techniques, but could do any setup or use any software like Lightroom or Photoshop to enhance the picture. There was no restrictions like in the earlier period of 3 months that we had the challenges running. Currently, we are actually onto a very interesting challenge, the before and after. The idea here is to use whatever Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever other application knowledge that one has to take an average or a not so average, below average image and try to convert that to a more acceptable level or a better image, enhancing the details. So what we do is we post these pictures on our Facebook group, and each one is encouraged to comment. It's sort of a critique where we expect the members to share their ideas of what they see good in this picture or whatever they have been, but whatever the member who has shared has done, at least 2 points about what the other members see as good, and 2 other points which they think could help the member to improve the photograph to another level. This has been actually very successful, and we have had very interesting and very good comments coming up, and with that knowledge, we have also been able to develop and improve our capabilities. We have also had, in the last 5 months, we had very, very interesting creative photography related presentations, starting with Manju in August, Laya followed up in September, George did in October, Mahin did in November, and then in December, we had Naomi doing a presentation. So they were very different, very creative, and gave us a lot of ideas as to what can be done in terms of creative photography. We are also going through a series of sessions every Monday, running for a period of, initially we thought of doing it for about 6 Mondays, 6 sessions, to demystify Photoshop, because unless you know and unless you understand and appreciate what can be done with Photoshop to improve and enhance your photography, a lot of people are scared to touch Photoshop, and a lot of people are averse to doing creative work because they fear the Photoshop capabilities of Photoshop program itself. So what we're doing is we are taking one bit at a time and going through them every week. So we have now done up to the third session. We will be doing 3 more sessions, and hopefully, if required, we will continue for another couple of weeks, maybe going up to 8 sessions. Beyond that, later, once we start using our knowledge and applying it to enhance our photographs, we will then come into a more in-depth, more advanced level of layering and using Photoshop to do very, very creative composites. So that's what we have been doing, and those who are in the group and those who are very active have been, I believe, have benefited from the sessions that we have had so far. And moving forward, we will also get into understand our cameras better, because we spend a lot of money, purchase a lot of equipment, but we hardly use the capabilities of most of our cameras. So we will, as a next step, once we demystify Photoshop, we will try to demystify the cameras as well. Okay, that brings me to today's presentation. The main highlight of the presentation is a presentation by our member Sandeep, who will be presenting to us a collection of his creative work titled Finding My Own Mark in Creative Photography. For those who are not met Sandeep and who are unfamiliar with what he's done, let me give a very brief introduction, and I will try to actually summarize what he has said in his introduction. He's an IT incident manager and an engineer by profession, and you would appreciate the thinking that goes into his creative work when you watch his presentation today, which I had the privilege of having seen earlier. And his photography journey started only a couple of years back, and interestingly, to manage stress. And he had found this during the COVID period an excellent way to overcome the hardship and the stress in being confined to his own home. He has accidentally sort of got involved or saw the presentation done at one of our meetings, and then joined the creative group, and is a very active member. So without further ado, let me welcome Sandeep, and I'm going to switch off my sharing. Sandeep, you can start from here. Over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can. You can start, Sandeep.
All right. Okay, great. So my presentation is going to be titled Finding My Own Mark in Creativity. So jumping in, basically in this presentation, I'm going to cover the gear choice that I have made, my creative process, and showcase some of my creative explorations, and talk a little bit about where I find my inspiration. And while we are going through these topics, there will always be 3 underlying questions. What am I shooting? How am I shooting? And why I am shooting the way I'm shooting, right? Moving on to the gear section. So when it comes to gears, I have broken this into 3 different segments. Camera and lenses, my software choice, and there are some other equipment that I use mainly for my creative work. When it comes to camera and lenses, I subscribe to 2 different systems for very specific purposes. So for my creative work and my day-to-day shoot work, I use a Fujifilm X-T4. And my go-to lens is the Fujinon 16 to 80 mm. This is a optically stabilized lens with weather resistance, so I can carry it anywhere I want, and gives me the focal length at which I'm shooting as well. Uh, in addition to that, I have been recently, this is one of my recent additions to my collection, which is my 85 f2.8 macro. So I have done some creative work using my macro lens and with some other techniques. So I'll be showcasing some of those in the coming slides. In addition to that, I also use the secondary system, my Ricoh GR. That's basically for my street photography work. But since we are more focused on creative photography, I'll just leave it there. And when it comes to software, of course, I have been using Lightroom Classic primarily. And recently I have been dabbling my fingers in Photoshop 2021 as well. I have tried my hands on Lumina 4, the Skylum software's Lumina 4 software. I've used it for a few pictures. I have one image here that I've used it for. I'll show it to you. And I primarily I use Snapseed. It's a core part of my workflow. So when we get to my workflow section, I'll show you why I use it. In addition to that, I am using some speed lights and I use some continuous lightings to take, you will see some examples of photographs I've taken using this equipment. And I used to use my macro ring light to do most of my macro work, but not anymore. So one of those previous presentations we had in PSSL inspired me to actually create one of my own light modifiers for my macro work. So I'll show that in the next slide as well. And some light modifiers, and another core part of my kit, wherever I go, I carry that, is my tab. It's an integral part of my workflow. So I'll move on. It's my gear. The yellow color tube you're seeing is the homemade macro flash diffuse that I am using mostly these days. If anybody is interested after the presentation, if you guys want to see it in my hand, I can show it to the camera as well. Moving on, the creative process. Now, this is basically the core of my presentation. My creative process, what I'm doing, why, how I'm doing, and why I'm doing that. So the first thing that I'm talking about is planning. Whenever I take a photograph, I put a lot of thought into my work. I do a lot of planning before I do, put my finger on the shutter actually. So plans are nothing, planning is everything. I really love this quote because while you're planning, your mind starts thinking of ways you can take the photograph and different ways you can take it and what ways you would hypothetically think that would work and would not work. So this is going to create some interesting learning opportunities for you when you're planning things. Basically, in my planning work, I think of the subject setup. How am I going to place this subject? Where is it going to be placed? What's going to be on the background? What's going to be on the foreground? And what's going to be on the sides? How is this going to be aligned to the frame? And lighting setup. How would I want the lighting to fall? Whether do I want ambient light to be present? Do I want to suppress the ambient light and control light completely with my speed lights? Or do I want to use some continuous lights to add a different feeling? And I also think about the exposure. What sort of an exposure am I looking at? Some of my plans. So what I do is I usually start by, I'm a visual thinker. So what I do is I start by doing a small sketch, a diagram on my tab, plan out different things of my shoot. And once I have the setup and all drawn very crudely, so you can see I'm not an someone who can draw very well, but I do sketches. I think of the exposure. I think of what I want to be captured in the system. Do I want something that is moving rapidly? Do I want something that moves very slowly to be stand still? So these kind of things I have to think during my planning session. That actually helps me do a better shoot when I'm doing the shoot. And I of course think about the framing, what angle from I'm coming into the image, and from where my camera is going to be placed, what's my viewer going to see, and how is that going to add to the whole feeling of the image. So this amount of thinking goes into my even other kind of work. uh, so for an example, this presentation that I'm presenting to you, it started off as this brain map. Basically, I was just going through the things that I want to talk to you, and how I'm going to structure them and how I'm going to place them in. So to finally create the presentation, it took me, I would say, 3-4 hours. But that also because I had to download certain images from my backup drives and put them in the sequence and that kind of thing. So another interesting quote: there are dreamers and there are planners. The planners make their dreams come true. Ed Cole. So he's the founder of Christian Men's Network and he's an author. Um, it's very interesting thought that goes very well with what I'm trying to present here. So once I do the planning, it comes to the shooting phase of work. So when I'm shooting, so I think of a few aspects of my shoot. Shooting mode. Now, everybody wants to shoot in manual. Now, we say the real photographers shoot in manual. Not necessarily. I've seen many internationally acclaimed photographers who shoot manual and some who shoot different, like partially semi-manual modes, like aperture priority or I would say a shutter priority. So I have seen that happen. Some even shoot in program mode when they're doing street kind of work. So for me, when I'm shooting in streets where being nimble is my priority, I want to quickly move, capture quick things, capture the decisive moment. I go for aperture priority and I put my ISO on auto. I'm not very much worried about the uh, the noise in the pictures, especially when I'm doing street work. And I use exposure compensation sometimes to control the lighting in the image that I'm seeing. Uh, I've been drawn more and more towards mirrorless because of the two camera systems that I have. And I'm really enjoying the benefits of having that giving me. And when I do creative photography, when I'm in a very controlled environment where I have planned out everything, I know how my light is going to be, I know how my subject is going to move or behave. And when I know all of that, I shoot in manual. It gives me minute level of control that I can take advantage of in that situation. The reason why I included this particular point here is we all need to aspire to be thinking photographers. We need to think what we are shooting, and we need to think how we are shooting and why we are making those decisions when we are shooting. Everybody talks about real photographers shoot raw. They do. There are many benefits of shooting raw, but always think whether you really need it. For me, some of my work, uh, especially my street related work, I don't need a raw file. I only need my JPEG. So I always shoot in RAW plus JPEG. Uh, you know, storage is not that expensive like they used to be. So I always shoot RAW plus JPEG. And there's another bigger reason why I keep the JPEG file also, which is part of my workflow, post processing. So I shoot and the JPEG directly goes to my tab on the go. So when I'm inspired by something that I saw and I want to associate certain thoughts or feelings that I had with it, uh, This is kind of how it works with the Instagram culture we have today. So from my tab, it goes to Snapseed. That's why I said Snapseed plays an integral part of my uh, creative process. And it goes usually to a backup storage or to Instagram if I'm planning to share it then and there. Right. Creative explorations. So now we are going to look at some of my photographs, some of the work that I have done. And I'll walk you through the preparation that went into creating those photographs and the things that I did to shoot the way I did. Um, I have broken this into a few different sections based on different techniques that I've used in creating these photographs. So the first section is going to be speaking about lighting. Most like all of these images were shot in camera using different lighting techniques. Um, when you can see the image to your left is the initial image that I shot with a single continuous light coming from the top. Was not that easy, but I was getting started. So my original plan, what the image that you see in the middle is the sketch that I did to create this image. Basically, I was thinking where my camera is going to be and where my lighting is going to be. So initially I started by setting one light in 45-degree angle to the subject and another one to the 90-degree angle to the subject. This is something that I learned through some of my portrait work. Uh, I applied the same, but I found something very interesting that by placing both the light sources, both my flashes with green and red gels, 45 degrees in angle to the subject would create a very pleasing effect. And I also, of course, used another, a flashlight that you use at home. Um, uh, Someone was holding that flashlight from the top, creating a small spot of light towards the bottom of the glass. So this was shot on my tabletop. No fancy gear, just a couple of flashlights with very cheap gel kits. This was created. This image uh, started off as a sketch again. I had a very vague idea in my head. In the middle of the night, I just took my tab out and I did a quick jot so that I can get back to it the next day. And the initial thought that I had was basically to have the white king falling and the black king standing. But when I was shooting, I realized there were some issues. Uh, I wanted to get the shadow on the board itself. If you can see the way I have placed this black piece on in midair is actually I paste a small stick to it with the super glue. Then in post processing, I took it out. Uh, but I still used my speed light at the 45-degree angle that I always use. And it gave me the right shadow that I was looking for. And yeah. Another image shot using one continuous light. Uh, this light source was placed from the top. Another creative experiment that I did, placing the light at different angles, trying to figure out how it's going to fall on different subjects and which one would create the best aesthetically pleasing image. Standing ground is what I call this. For those who are familiar or part of the creative group, will remember these images probably. Um, I got a lot of offers from people who wanted to come and help me finish off the remaining donuts after the shoot. And so the image on the right is the first image that I actually shot. I took several shots and I tried to create a certain effect, which I managed to do with the image on my right. And then I posted this image on the creative group and I received feedback. I received feedback from people who saw things differently. They said, why don't you shoot this in a white background? This would pop the colors more. So I did that. I tried that. I wanted to try that out. The reason why I included both these images here is a very important point. When we have people who are like-minded and who are enthusiastic about our craft, we need to listen to the feedback that we get. It's not enough to just hear that, okay, this is great, good job, nice work. We need to also hear the criticism that we get, both positive and negative. And we need to make it a learning experience. So this is me trying to learn and trying to experiment based on the feedback that I received to see how it will improve my photography. Another image familiar to my fellow members in the creative group. So my initial plan was to create the image that you see on the right-hand side. I actually planned for this much ahead of time. I made eyes with food coloring to get the multicolored, that complex nature from this image. But while I was setting it up, I was simply setting it up and I saw the image appear that is on the left to you on screen. You need to keep your eyes open. So this is a happy accident. So I saw the image. I was not trying to create the image on my left. I was trying to create the one on the right. But you need to keep your eyes open, your mind open to seeing things. Seeing is going to be a very creative, very important or crucial skill for the photographers. Even if we have very expensive DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, your eye is going to be one of your key equipments that you carry always. So I started shooting the image to my right again. I used a couple of gels, 2 speed lights. Again, my 45-degree angle placement of 2 flash lights, speed lights, to right and left of the subject. And it created this very pleasing divide in the middle of the light on the subject. So I thought, what else can I shoot with this? It was raining. It just stopped raining when I was finished with shooting the image on the right. I just went out to see what's there. I remembered that water drops falling on some things would be nice reflectors that will create a pleasing effect. So I was looking for something. I saw this tiny piece of garden weed that I carried inside very carefully, not to shake it too much so the water drops would get disturbed. I placed it on my tabletop and I used a small clamp that I usually use for my backdrops and stuff. And I placed it upright and used the same flash setup. I did not change anything else. I just changed the subject. And I was happy with what I got. So next, we move on to light paintings. So I have been playing around with light paintings for a few weeks, where I was trying to understand different things about light painting and how I can use them in my future photography work. I started with a plan. I sketched something. I was inspired by some videos and things that I saw on YouTube. I took few lessons out of them, and what I did was I used an old compact disc, placed it laying flat on one of my flat lay tables, and I mounted the camera on my tripod, and I tried to place it completely downward so that it will take the picture laying on the floor. Um, I did this in a dark room with an aperture of f16, and this was 30-second exposure. And how I got the light to give this reflections is I used a simple continuous light, and I moved it around the compact disc, creating these different reflections based on the amount of time I spent near a particular point on the CD. The color that came was different, so it was creating a very pleasing effect. I call this light in circular motion. So this image is what I wanted to actually create. The previous image was something that I shot while I was trying to get here. CD with water droplets. So this is something that I saw online. I tried to recreate same technique, except that I placed a few water droplets on top of the CD um, with a small syringe. When I did that, I started thinking, what else can I do? What if I make only half of the CD illuminate with the light and leave the other side black or dark as much as possible? I tried that. I moved my continuous light only a half a circle around the CD. I was quite impressed with the image that I got. I was pleased with it. Double exposure. So now we are coming to things that I do mostly with either Lightroom or Snapseed. Images that I capture and how I manipulate them to create certain works of art. So this is the same CD you saw earlier, but I used another. So the image that you see on the top left is a black and white image or a monochrome image of that same CD, but only the center portion of it. And I have played around with the image, the exposure curve on Snapseed, or you can do the same things in um, uh, Lightroom, where you can inverse the curve, which will create a very pleasing effect. Play around with it. You will see some amazing things in your image, especially when you do creative photography work. And then I used another light painting in double exposure, and I ended up creating these images. These are all what do you call learning experiences that I had. What's more in double exposure? Remember the CD that I created earlier? So that was laying there just, and I used so I used a what do you call a phone, one of my phones, with an image, a multicolor with multicolored dots in it, loaded it full screen to my phone in a fully dark room with a probably a 5-second exposure. I was drawing with that light on the sensor like a canvas. And when I did a few of these images, when I saw this image, it reminded me of an eye. And the first thing that came to my mind is, where can I find an iris? I have already shot an iris. So I took these two images, put them in double exposure, and this is the outcome. The image to my right, uh, this is a photograph I have taken at one of my relatives' places. It's an artificial flower. It was a very plain and very boring image when I took it initially, but played a little bit around it, used a similar light painting to do a bit of a double exposure on this image to give multiple colors on the flower. And I was pleased with the outcome, blooming in isolation. You can do a lot of abstract photography with when it comes to when you do creative photography. So the image to your left is basically an image of the surface of a lampshade. It was shot, so the black areas you see on this image were originally white, and the trailing or the paint trailings kind of thing that you see on this image were black. So what I did was I crushed the blacks, I improved the whites through my curve. Again, I'm playing around with the curve, and I did a double exposure, and I created this abstract light art. The image to the right, again, for those who are part of the creative photography group, they would remember this. So when I originally created this image, the original photograph was taken at a zebra lines crossing very close to my home. It was a pretty boring photograph. I wanted, it was through one of my street photography walks that I took this photograph. It was pretty boring, but I thought, how can I make it interesting? So few days before this being shot, I had done a long exposure shoot on a bridge that runs over the highway. So light trailing kind of a photograph. So I used those light trailings, did a double exposure. But before doing so, I converted my street photograph to black and white, and I did an inversion on the curve and created a very high contrasty, very pleasing effect. And I did this double exposure. When I originally created this image, uh, the light trail was actually not going through the zebra lines. It was leading towards the policeman. But I received some feedback, and based on the that constructive criticism that I received, I played around again with this image, and I think what I created now is much more pleasing than what I had earlier. Energy flowing in the streets. The next section is something that I'm currently working on, creative macro, how I play around with macro photography. So in this case, I thought of recreating the past few weeks we had in the creative photography group, where we had the image before and after. And I wanted to include some of my before images, the one that I captured on the camera, and what I created through post-processing. So the image to your left is a tiny pebble lying on a black backdrop, taken with a 1:1 life-size macro lens. And that small circle kind of thing that you see in the middle is actually the reflection from my macro ring light. So as it was, I could not really use it because of that reflection. So I played around with it. I inverse again the curve. I made blacks white, whites black, and played around with a little bit of midtones, and used double exposure of a light painting, and I created the image abstract pebble art. Another macro photograph of mine, abstract flower art. Basically, this I captured just a random flower that I captured. It already had a purple hue to it, and I remembered that I also had another image that I had taken few days ago of a masquerade mask, a purple color one with a bit of a gold sheen to it. So I thought, let me play around with this and see how it comes out. And again, I inversed the curve and did double exposure, created abstract flower art. When you have a macro lens in your hand, day-to-day objects, day-to-day things become very interesting. It's just a matter of you seeing differently. So that lens is gonna bring you closer to things that you never thought were there, and gonna help you create very interesting artwork. Um, if anybody care to guess what's on the top left, so that is the peel of a mango, a very ripe mango. And I my go-to method of image processing, I basically inverse the and used a double exposure on top of it. The image on the left bottom is a squash, something like a pumpkin. So there's a lot you can do when you have that kind of view at world. Um, I know most of the people who are from the creative group would remember this photograph. This is something of a homage to the few weeks we had in creative group where everybody wanted to post something related to garlic, if you all remember. Uh, so this is a bulb of garlic sitting on my table. And when I shot it with a macro lens, and what I saw was quite interesting. Felt like an alien landscape, mountaintop, or a cratered volcano kind of a thing. Then I wanted to work and add maybe a cosmic feeling to it. I wanted to add a starry background. This is one of those photographs where I used another photograph that I had created with Skylum's Lumina 4. This is an AI created sky that I used. But what I did was I took that image, cut the sky piece, and in Photoshop, I used multiple layers and merged these two images. Alien landscape on a tabletop. Now I'm sharing some photographs I don't think I have ever shared even in the creative group. Um, Creative macro photography, things that you can do as setups. So this basically, I call it a gas planet on the tabletop, but this actually is a bubble, a soap bubble. And when I was creating it, initially I was creating soap bubbles by simply putting some soap liquid into water and stirring it and using a straw to blow up some bubbles. And the bubble would not last for more than a couple of seconds, maximum 3 seconds. And I wanted to increase the time the bubble stays on, because the longer it stays, the beautiful the designs or patterns that appear on the surface of the bubble. So I did some research online. People who had done bubble photography way before me had some solutions. One of the solutions was to actually add uh, glycerin to it. So I mixed glycerin and soap dishwashing liquid and with some water, and I created a liquid that could actually create bubbles that would last up to 10 seconds or so. So that was giving me plenty of time to do some shoots. But I wanted to do something very interesting, which was to stir the surface of these bubbles by blowing some air on it, add some chaos to the falling soap. So my bubbles were not strong enough. So then I saw another person who had used uh, honey, bee honey, to make the bubbles stronger. But he had used dishwash liquid and bee honey. He had not used glycerin. So me being the average homes chemist, I mixed all three together and I managed to create a liquid that can give me bubbles that would last up to more than 1 minute. So that was giving, and they were very strong bubbles. They would, even if I blow them to the air, they would just float, fall somewhere and stay there for a few seconds before it even blows. So I can easily introduce more chaos through blowing some air on the bubble and creating nice effects. This is one of my favorite images that I had created through bubble photography. Souls ascending from the eternal fire. Um, One of the last images I wanted to show you all, merging ice and fire. It's again a bubble photograph. So I was looking at the way things get reflected off of the bubble, and I started thinking how I can make the things very interesting. So what I did was, I did not introduce flashlights. I was shooting these through ambient light. What I did was, I placed two different color objects next to the bubble. So the bubble would start reflecting that image, and took this image. Whenever I combine these colors, I always pay attention to like contrasting colors. They create very visually appealing effects um, on the subject that you're trying to shoot. So again, something to think. Finding inspiration. Never limit your vision based on your current resources. Be resourceful. You can you can come up with, you can envision an idea. This is the image I want to create. Plan it. Plan it so well that you will identify the problems that you're going to face beforehand. Sometimes while you're trying to execute, you will identify problems as well. Then spend some time identifying solutions. This is what I do. I find myself inspired all the time because I have a problem at my hand and I have been asked to solve it if I want to achieve the envision goal that I wanted to at the beginning. So the flash diffuse you saw earlier is something similar to that. I didn't like the reflection my ring lights were giving on my macro images. So I thought, what else can I do? I started experimenting with these Pringles cans to create a snoot that can carry my light from a normal flash all the way to the lens, because that's where my subject is going to lie. Since it's a macro lens, it will be very close to the lens, the front element of the lens. Experimented with it, failed, tried again, tried different things. And finally, I have a setup that I always carry around. That's the image that you saw earlier, that I use for my macro work, all of my macro work actually. So we are at the very beginning. I know we are at the end of this month, but we are at the beginning of a whole new year. Um, Shoot often and aspire to be divergent. It's okay to be different. You don't need to shoot the same thing that everyone does, shoot the same way that everyone does. Find your own mark in creativity. So I welcome you all to the new year and wish you all good luck and Thank you. So if you want to follow my street work, follow me on Instagram, or my macro work, you can follow me there as well. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well done.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sandeep. That was a mesmerizing set of pictures. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions as to certain methods and applications that you've done. So the floor is open. Anyone can still ask questions from Sandeep to clear any doubts you have or any other clarifications. Please go ahead.
Sandeep, is your life is as orderly as you're thinking?
I try to do that. My work kind of demands it.
Well, fantastic presentation. I do have a question. It's about the double exposure. You are using that term. Would you mind actually telling us exactly what you meant by that term and then how you executed it?
So if you remember, I use Snapseed for most of my photograph processing, post-processing. Yeah.
Correct.
So in Snapseed, also you can do double exposure. This is not in-camera double exposure layer.
Okay, that's where I missed. Yeah, that's what because you were getting photos from different sources and you're combining. I was trying to figure out how the hell does he do that in the camera?
Yes. So this is not in camera. So the first two set of images were in camera stuff, but the double exposure onwards, mostly post processing.
Highly creative, I must say. Very
much.
Inspiring. Yeah, I toyed around with the CDs, but as you say, I didn't get very far. I actually created a little platform that actually rotates.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an old motor, and I just put something in there and then try to put the CD there and use different lights to see if it actually goes, but didn't go anywhere.
Okay. I used a single white light actually. The reflections of the works of the CD itself, not different color lights.
Okay. So in those ones that in the CD, you didn't actually use the gels or anything like that. It's only in the white light.
Only the white light.
Wow.
It's not even a proper continuous light. It's just basically the the torch flashlight thing that my dad has. I use that one.
Very nice. It reflects in the those little beads that you actually placed on the thing.
Yeah.
Sandeep, excellent presentation.
Thanks, Shamini.
I really like the idea of like you spending I think 80% of your time on planning because it's really as you said, as the quote said, like, dreaming is easy, but if you have to plan it and execute it, then only you can get your results. So your planning process is, I think, it's a lot of us can, those who are not using planning for the creative process, I think it's a good starting point because this is the same I have seen that being done by Manju also, because I miss most of other presentations, but in Manju's presentation also, she has mentioned that she take time in conceptualizing and planning. So you do that as well, and it shows in your final results, and that had a great impact. And the other thing that I want to point out is, like, different images shows that your unique way of approaching creativity. But what I like about most is that you mentioning that you have taken the constructive criticism well, and then you worked on it to see whether what the others are saying will improve your work as well. So I think that's a very good way to improve your work. So overall, it's a good presentation. I really like your thought process.
Thanks, Shyamini. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sandeep, most of the pictures that you had done as setups appear to be taken in the night. But would you like to elaborate on the way that you managed to get the backgrounds dark and to make it look like you have taken it in the dark?
Yeah, so Sam, I use two different things to control my lighting. So first thing is when I want to create a dark background, I start with a dark background because I have the control, right? But to add a sense of that environment, what I do is I cut down on ambient light by the increasing my shutter speed to a very high level, or using a very small aperture, and I cut down the ambient light as much as possible, and I keep my ISO at base ISO, and then I use my controlled artificial lighting to create the mood that I want to create. So that's why I use multiple lights when I need to get the exact outcome that I need.
Okay, thank you.
This question is to Sam. Sandeep said that he used the Snapseed mostly than Photoshop. What do you think, Sam, using Snapseed for post-processing?
Shamini, personally, I haven't had much experience with Snapseed, and it is actually a mobile device-based application, if I'm not greatly mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah.
Anyone who wants to do it on the run, on the go, like, because as Sandeep explained in his workflow, most of what he wants to upload to the Google Drive and then to the
Instagram
or to the Facebook, he does it on his tab. So it's a good process if you are limiting it to that level. But
right.
I'm sure most of what he has done can be done even much better, and you can even go to further extent if you start if anyone starts to use Photoshop, because that has much more capabilities. I'm really not sure of the capabilities of Snapseed. I have used it probably twice when we started the mobile photography group.
Yeah.
Right, long about a year ago or whatever. Other than that, I have no experience. But my personal opinion is that when you are into creative work, start with whatever you have, get your creative juices flowing, and then dive deep into whatever the application that you want to use. If Snapseed works for you, that's fine. But if you want to go further, get into heavy layering and processing and all that, well, I'm sure Photoshop will add a lot of weight to that.
So Sam, I can add a small thing to that also.
Sure.
This image that I'm showing right now, this small stick that is supporting the black piece hovering over the chessboard.
Yeah.
I tried to remove this from Snapseed. It also has a spot healing kind of a tool, but the outcome was not as satisfactory as doing it through Photoshop.
And not that sharp, no?
Yeah, it's not that sharp, and it's not that content aware as like Photoshop. So I had to bring this image to Photoshop and do that part.
I think
similarly,
that's a
Sandeep, sorry to interrupt. If you go back to the other picture, the one with the chessboard, the red and white one, what you just showed. Yeah, I was wondering, why didn't you take that other black line across? Because I find that a bit distracting. Why didn't you think of taking the horizontal, the black line there?
I was, but
What is that
neither
black line? Is it a
Snapseed nor
mirror?
Photoshop gave me a satisfactory result.
No.
Actually.
What I mean, what is that black line? Is it the fold? Fold in the
Yes,
chessboard?
it is the fold. It is the fold.
I feel that the whole effect of what you wanted to get as a chessboard is ruined, my personal opinion, because instead of it being a nice flat board, that black line across, I found that unfortunately, because you've gone into a lot of work of putting it, placing, but that thing was a bit of a unfortunate thing, I feel.
Sandeep, if you select the black line, rather than trying to spot heal it, select it carefully, you should be able to change the color without match it with the red color. That might help.
I will try that. Oh, I was thinking was actually to shoot this again with a flat lay chessboard. That's canvas kind of a chessboard that doesn't have any folds or any creases.
Sandeep,
one thing, sorry, Mahir, just another suggestion. Why don't you just convert this to black and white and see? Because the red squares.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. let me try that. I'll try that.
Yeah.
I'll share that in the group today.
Yeah.
Sandeep, the next image is very nice.
This one.
Yeah, I really like
that's lovely.
I really like the lighting.
Thank you. That's a single light coming from the top.
Sandeep, couple of questions. Now, I also use Snapseed as a mount. Well, that's the only one I know to use. Thanks to Sam, hopefully I'll learn a little more about Photoshop. But now in Snapseed, you kept telling the curve you were inversing it to get it. What exactly would you mean by inversing the curve?
So if you go to the curve, Mahin, what you will see is you have the two ends. You have the blacks and the whites, right? The darks and the highlights.
Yeah.
So if you leave the darks, if you push the darks all the way to the top, now it's starting at the bottom, right? So if you push it all the way to the top, your blacks will become white. And you pull your black all the way to down, your whites will become black. So you inverse that.
I'm just trying it out, and wow, I'm going to getting some crazy ones. Okay. Great. So you're going to see a few more of these coming up in the next few days. I never realized that can be done. Okay.
So another thing you can try, Mahin, you can leave the midpoint as it is and the white point as it is, and black point as it is. Bring the white all the way to the bottom. So what you create is kind of like a curve, not a straight line, but a curve.
I didn't get that.
Leave the black, kind of like a bell curve. Leave the dark point where it is. Pull only the white.
Dark point means which one? The bottom one?
Yeah. The one on your left bottom, leave it as it is.
Yeah.
Pull the point on the top right all the way to down. That will create a very cool effect as well. So I've used that a lot with the double exposure.
But when I do that, it becomes flat, right?
No, it will not become flat because your midtones are still going to stay up. So your blacks and whites are going to get crushed, and it will create a very nice
point in the middle.
Now I did something. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Right. Okay. Thanks. And bubble photography, also I have tried it myself a couple of times, but it's great what you did, that you didn't just take the bubble photography, but you inversed and made a story out of it. That's nice. So that it's just not the typical bubble, but you did something more to it. That's great. Thanks. I'm going to try some CD photographs also soon.
So what actually inspired you to do this, the curve inversions?
I have been, I'm a curious person. That's what an engineer does, kind of.
Absolutely. Tell me about it.
So I've been playing around with the curve for a while. So most of my straight photographs, Laya, if you remember, I crush my blacks and create
I
a high
know.
contrasty look, right?
I commented on it.
So that's also a part of that, something that came as a stylistic element through these experiments.
Very nice.
So the inspiration came from a
Initially,
comment that was given by wha- um, okay, I'm sorry, who was the organizer of the PSSL 65th?
Romesh.
Ramesh, sorry, I totally forgot his name. He's gonna kill me. So he gave this comment where I was asking a question about a photograph that he had taken of a musician, a black and white photograph, and I asked him why did he choose to shoot spot metering in that, and the answer basically he didn't really tell me. He said that suited that situation, that's why I chose it. But what he said next was inspiring. You guys are not shooting film, you guys are shooting digital. It doesn't cost you anything to click your shutter and see things. Similarly, it doesn't cost us anything to try to process the image differently. If we don't like it, do it non-destructive, of course. You can always come back to where you were, and you can play around with it till you learn something very interesting or new. So that's what I have been doing, kind of.
Very nice. Can I share a thought that actually went through my mind as I was actually presenting? This has nothing to do with photography, but as a professional engineer over about 30, 40 years, I have been recruiting many top class engineers here in Canada. Well, one of the things that I've been doing is it just occurred to me that you are one of the people I would have hired immediately. And the two other categories of engineers who have done are people who have done karate and music. The inspiration and the creativity, unbelievable.
Thanks. Well, I've done karate as well, so I
Oh, there you are. My point. I have not gone wrong with those people. I tell you, they've all been extremely successful in their lives. Some of them are CEOs now and VPs. But their creativity in the labs.
Sandeep,
This
migrating.
creative group, not talent hunting. Huh?
Yeah, I know. Shamini will get back at me now.
Not really.
For talent hunting.
No, not really. Spot a good talent is always a good thing.
Thanks, Lab. That's very interesting to hear, actually. Thanks.
No, I've noticed that there were so many. I mean, I must have hired up in 200-300 engineers and scientists. This is a thing that I've noticed. How people, that was my first question. Is your life as organized as you're thinking? Those are the things I ask in an interview.
Yeah, actually, his first two slides itself really impressed me. I really like someone who's planning and using a mind map.
Yeah, it's very good. So in addition to kind of photography, I think Ravin probably can take something from this as well. Thinking, planning, orderly fashion.
Mm.
I don't know if Ravin is in.
I saw him.
Yeah, I am here. I can
there
hear.
you are.
Yes, I'm here. Yes. Very interesting. We use mind maps, I suppose.
Yeah.
See, I have to do a mind map for the next program that we are going to for the capture this.
So there you got your person now.
I need to prepare one.
Okay. For this also, I used a mobile software on my tab.
No, actually, showing this type of information in your process for the others, it will be very useful because some of us have gone through these processes during for work, but some of the others have not gone through similar processes during their, especially their work. I think these things can now help them also to use it. You can bring what you learn from work to photography, and you can take photography to your work as well. It's life and also to your life.
Absolutely. Just a technical question. The Snapseed, who actually uses that often? I've never used it. I don't think my tabs would actually even run that because it probably is processing heavy. Who uses them typically?
Is mobile phone users.
So can you run that on your mobile as well, or it has to be a tab?
Yes.
It is running on mobiles.
It's running on mobile. It's on phones or even tab you can.
Oh, wow. So the mobile doesn't come to a halt when you actually do all this creative stuff?
No, it's very simple.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. So this is a very lightweight process that runs on Android. It's developed by Google, so
So it
it's
only
pretty
runs on
native.
Android or iOS as well?
iOS as
I
well.
have only used it in Android.
Okay.
iOS as well, Laya.
It runs on Apple as well.
Okay.
Actually, Praveen, Sam's son did a good presentation on Snapseed in one of our, the very first photo puri that we had.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Sandeep, this is Yoga.
Yes.
Yes,
It's a wonderful presentation, Sandeep. It's very useful, very interesting.
thank you.
My question to you is on macro photography.
Mhm.
Use a tripod when you're doing the macro photography, or all the time, or sometime? I need you.
So when I do stack focusing, I use a tripod and a focused rail. But for photographs I have shown here today, these were all handheld.
Okay.
Because I am not using only ambient light, they are all handheld.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Sandeep. I already started following your Instagram. There are a lot of photographs on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yoga, I don't know whether you picked up something he said about
Yes, I
focus
picked
stacking.
up.
Focus stacking?
Yeah.
You know how to do it?
If you could give me more information, that'd be really great.
Yeah. Sandeep, why don't you elaborate a little bit more on focus stacking? That's a new concept.
Right. So the way a macro lens works is you're going to get your front element of the lens very close to your subject. Because of this, the depth of field becomes very shallow. Even at f16, it becomes very shallow. So I would never recommend anybody who's used, now let's say you're shooting a full frame camera. I would not recommend you to go beyond f16 or f11 because distortion comes into play and the image becomes blurry actually. Even though you think it would get sharper, no, it would work the other way. So let's say now I'm shooting on an APS-C. So I can go, I can get a very good depth of field at around f5.6 to f8. I would push it to f11 if really needed, if it is a good quality glass. And still, I'm getting a depth of field something around a few millimeters. So even though my subject is very tiny, it's that depth is not enough for me to cover or focus on everything that I want to be in focus. So what we do is we start from the back of the image or from the front of the image. We start taking multiple photographs with different focal points. Basically, you're focusing on different points of the image from front to back or back to front. And once you have this image sequence, you can post-process them on a software, stack them on top of each other to create one image that has better focus from front to end across. When you're doing this, there are two ways that you can do this. One thing is you can now in a macro lens, what you do is basically you zoom it to the highest point 1:1, or my lens can go to 1.5 to 1. That goes little beyond macro, but I still use 1:1 level in my lens, and my camera with me, I am moving in and out of the so in and out of the image, so that my focal point will change every time I move a tiny bit forward and tiny bit backward. But when I do that, the precision is very low, because as I'm not precisely moving a 1 millimeter or a 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters like that. I'm just guessing it. So instead, I can mount my camera on top of my tripod, but between my tripod and my camera body lies another small equipment called a focus rail. Basically, it's kind of like a track on which the camera can move back and forward or to the sideways with the use of a small knob. Basically, I can turn that knob clockwise or counterclockwise to move the camera in those directions at a very minute, very precise manner. So I can precisely move it 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter and take multiple photographs of the same image. But this works only if your subject is not moving around. If your subject is quite chaotic and moving around, it's like nearly impossible to do a focus tracking. If you have a subject that stands still, you can do that technique to get a image that's focused across.
Yeah. For moving subject, we can't do that anyway. No? Yeah.
Well, adding to that, Sandeep, your X-T4 should be able to do it automatically.
As in, I can do focus. In my camera, focus tracking is available. So if I have a fully automatic lens, yes. But my macro lens is a fully manual lens.
I see. Okay.
Sam.
Yeah. So,
so I have to use an external rail to do that.
Yeah. So Yoga, what I was trying to explain is that some of the newer cameras not all the cameras, even some of the most top-end cameras probably don't have it. This function of focus tracking is now inbuilt to it, so that you can put in a autofocus lens and set up the number of shots that are to be taken, and the camera will automatically sequentially take so many shots that you define it to take, and later you can merge them into a single image.
So Sam, it actually slowly rotates the lens and actually get different focal points?
Yeah, automatically it does. I don't know whether it is, it has to be focusing. There are two ways of doing it. I don't know which way it is doing it. One is to shift your focus. If your sensor can be moved back and forth. The other one is where the lens elements are moving. So either way, it can be done. But I think it's mostly the lens.
So most of the cameras nowadays, Sam, they use the lens. So basically, in Fuji ecosystem, what you get is focus bracketing. So you can decide the stepping of how much of a difference you want and how many images you are going to take. The movement of the sensor is, I think, no longer used like when they had the bellows, the Nikon bellows, where you could move back and forth the sensor where it is comparative to the lens. I don't think they are using it anymore because of the cost of making it.
Yeah,
so instead of that, they are making the autofocus of the lens.
So the points of focus, can you actually change that? How do you define the points of focus in a bracketed mind?
You have to define the number of shots, and it's not a very clearly defined method of understanding or explaining what the steps are, but you can say so many. I can't remember the exact term that is being used, but you give the camera to take what is the exact term that is used in X-T4? Sandeep, I can't remember.
focus bracketing.
No, the steps. There's
Sorry.
some odd term that is being used. It's only to say move so much, but we don't know how much it is.
That was my question. How much do you, like you, as you said, millimeter on the micrometer dial? Likewise, how do you actually define that?
It's not given like that. It's not given like that. It's just a kind of a number.
So just
it
going
says
back
1, 2, 3, kind of like you can say
1 to 10 or something. No?
Yeah, plus
okay.
and negative minus. You get that kind of a thing.
Okay. So the plus and minus means that you either go forward or backwards. Is that what it means?
Correct. So it will go both forward and backward from a point.
Okay.
So it's similar to exposure bracketing, where you take plus 1 exposure image and a -1 exposure image and a 0 exposure image, and then you combine it kind of like that.
Okay. So Sandeep, the track that you're using, it actually gets mounted on the tripod, right? And you put the camera on top of it? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay.
So Nilan is using a lot of this focus, like stacking and focus rail, I believe. He is very much interested, or he was talking to me about this for the last few weeks also.
Okay.
Those who are doing real macro photography are actually using focus bracketing, and sometimes they run into about hundreds through thousands of pictures to get that the depth that they want. So
especially in extreme macro, Sam, when you go above one to one, you can do a lot of things with. I've been trying to experiment with some of those. I've been trying to create an extreme macro setup using some telescope pieces. So I'm still working on it.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Then thank you very much, Sandeep, for a wonderful presentation. As I said at the beginning, it showed the class of how an engineer looks at things and how he would shoot. It's very inspiring, and I hope that the others would also start thinking, jotting down what they want to do, and then experimenting and coming up with various creative work. So congratulations for a well presented set of creative pictures. Thank you very much.